In October 1982, a man was arrested in a Los Angeles hotel room with 220 pounds of cocaine and a very specific problem. That man was not a cartel boss. He was not a trafficker. He was the founder of one of the most talked-about car companies in the world. And he had come to that hotel room because he was completely out of other options. John Zachary DeLorean did not start as a desperate man. He started as arguably the most talented automobile executive of his generation. At General Motors in the 1960s, he was the wunderkind, the man who greenlit the Pontiac GTO, a car that essentially invented the American muscle car category. He was promoted to run the Chevrolet division at 40, the youngest divisional head in GM history. Under his watch, Chevrolet sold over 3 million vehicles a year. He was brilliant, charismatic, and extremely aware of both those facts. In 1973, he quit. He walked away from one of the most powerful jobs in the American automotive industry and told anyone who would listen that GM had become a bureaucratic machine that crushed innovation. He was not entirely wrong. He was also not entirely humble about it. His vision: build the ethical sports car. Safe, durable, beautiful. A car with a stainless steel body, gull-wing doors, and a rear-mounted engine. A car that would last a lifetime. He called it the DMC-12. He would later just call it the DeLorean. The design was penned by Giorgetto Giugiaro, one of the most celebrated automotive designers alive. The engineering would be handled in collaboration with Lotus. On paper, the pedigree was extraordinary. On paper. Now DeLorean needed money. A lot of it. He raised an estimated $30 million from private investors, celebrities, athletes, dentists, accountants, and people who believed in the dream and, frankly, in the man selling it. He was exceptionally good at selling it. But $30 million was nowhere near enough to launch a car company. So DeLorean did something audacious even by his standards. He approached the British government. Specifically, the government of Northern Ireland, which was in the middle of a brutal sectarian conflict and desperately needed jobs. The deal he negotiated was staggering. The British government provided approximately $100 million in subsidies, grants, and loans to build a factory in Dunmurry, just outside Belfast. In exchange, DeLorean promised roughly 2,600 jobs in one of the most economically devastated regions of the United Kingdom. The government said yes. Of course they did. The Dunmurry plant was built from scratch. Workers were hired with essentially no prior automotive manufacturing experience. Quality control systems were still being written as production began. The first DeLorean rolled off the line in January 1981. The car was genuinely striking. The stainless steel panels, the gull-wing doors that swung up like something from a science fiction film. Reviewers called it unlike anything else on the road. American buyers put down deposits. Dealers reported waiting lists. For a brief moment, it looked like DeLorean had actually pulled it off. Then the reviews came in. Not just the aesthetic ones, the performance ones. The DMC-12 was powered by a 2.85-liter Peugeot Renault Volvo V6 engine producing approximately 130 horsepower. In a car that weighed over 2,700 pounds. 0 to 60 took around 10 seconds. This was 1981. A Porsche 911 did it in 6. The build quality was inconsistent. Early units had panel gaps, electrical problems, and doors that sometimes did not open from the inside. DeLorean had promised a revolution. He had delivered a very expensive, very beautiful, somewhat unreliable novelty. The company had planned to sell around 12,000 cars in the first year. They sold approximately 7,500. Then the United States economy entered a severe recession. Interest rates hit 20%. Luxury car sales collapsed across the board. DeLorean Motor Company was burning through cash at a rate it could not sustain. By early 1982, the company owed creditors millions. The British government, which had already poured in over $100 million, was running out of patience and political will. Receivers were circling. DeLorean was scrambling. Here is where the story stops being a business tragedy and becomes something else entirely. In the summer of 1982, DeLorean was introduced to a man named James Hoffman. Hoffman was a convicted drug smuggler. He was also, at this point, a paid FBI informant. Over several months, Hoffman and FBI agents posing as traffickers presented DeLorean with a proposal. Invest in a cocaine deal worth an estimated $24 million. Use the proceeds to save the car company. DeLorean on tape agreed. He reportedly called it cocaine going into gold. On October 19, 1982, DeLorean arrived at a hotel in Los Angeles for what he believed was the completion of the deal. FBI agents were waiting. The cameras were rolling. He was arrested and charged with drug trafficking. The footage was broadcast on every major news network. The image of one of America's most celebrated entrepreneurs holding a suitcase full of cocaine became one of the defining images of the decade. DMC had already entered receivership in February 1982, 8 months before the arrest. The company was gone. The arrest was simply the headline on the obituary. Approximately 9,000 DeLoreans were produced in total before the factory closed. Around 6,500 are estimated to still exist today. The Dunmurry plant was shut down, eliminating those 2,600 jobs that the British government had paid over $100 million to create. The cars outlasted everything else. DeLorean was acquitted in 1984. His defense successfully argued entrapment, that the government had induced a desperate man into a crime he would not otherwise have committed. The jury agreed. The judge called the government's conduct, in his words, shocking. DeLorean walked free. Everything else remained wrecked. A postscript the story rarely includes. A significant portion of the British government's investment, reportedly around $17 million, was later found to have been siphoned through a company called GPD Services into accounts controlled by DeLorean himself. A civil settlement was eventually reached. He denied wrongdoing to the end of his life. John DeLorean died in 2005, largely broke, still talking about making a comeback. There were always new plans, a new DeLorean, a new factory, new investors. The pitch never really stopped. It was, in the end, the one thing he never lost, the absolute unshakable belief that the next deal would fix everything. Here is the lesson, and it is not a gentle one. DeLorean did not fail because he lacked talent. He failed because he confused personal mythology with operational discipline. He was world-class at raising money and generating belief. He was catastrophically bad at building systems, managing quality, and knowing when a situation had become unrecoverable. The cocaine deal was not a random act of desperation. It was the logical endpoint of a man who had always believed that one more audacious move could override every structural problem beneath him. It had worked at GM. It had half-worked in Belfast. In a Los Angeles hotel room, it did not work at all. If you want to see what happens when a genuinely brilliant founder refuses to acknowledge the ceiling, stick around. Next, we are looking at the Ranos, the most expensive fake product in Silicon Valley history. Subscribe for more hidden empires.